Every photographer needs a 135mm lens, and every mirrorless photographer needs a vintage 135mm lens. There are many available, and many of those are very inexpensive, starting from around £20 to £30 or thereabouts. To find out more, keep watching. Well, hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again and welcome to another one. So why does every photographer need a 135mm lens? Well, of course that's not exactly and entirely a true statement. If you have any lens, you can make images with it and you can work creatively within those limits. So nobody actually needs a 135, but they will lend a certain visual signature to images that you can't get with any other lens. They do have a unique visual signature and they make images like no other lens can make. They have plenty of reach, obviously, that's what they're for. I like shooting at 50 for sure, but it's often nice to get a little bit of a longer reach in your images and in a lens that you're using. I particularly like a little bit of reach for making street portraits. I find that a 135mm lens can pick out faces very nicely, very beautifully, and do a very nice job of taking candid street portraits. So that's one area where they are very useful. Formal portraits as well, of course. You make a beautiful formal portrait with a 135, and a 135 lens, any longer lens really, especially with a wider aperture, will give you a little compression. It will make the background and the subject sort of squashed together, have a squashed together appearance, which a shorter lens, a wider lens rather, just won't do. So although you can make a nice portrait with a 50 or a 75, if you use a really long lens like a 135, you're going to get that compression in your shot, which is a very lovely aesthetic effect. So which 135s can I recommend? Well, I'm going to recommend this one first of all. This one is a beautiful lens. It's also a very heavy lens. It's made in East Germany. It's the Pentacon 2.8, f2.8, 135mm. And this lens is exactly the same lens as the Meyer Optic Orestor f2.8 135mm. If you buy it in Pentacon form, it's much cheaper. This lens sells for around £40 or thereabouts, and it's got lots of aperture blades. How many has it got? There are a lot of aperture blades in there. I think there must be around 15 in there. So this is a great lens for giving nice circular bokeh balls. It's a cheap lens, as I say. It's fairly sharp from wide open. It's certainly respectably sharp from wide open, as all of these lenses are. You can shoot them all day wide open, and it gives a very nice color signature as well. It's got a real bright, beautiful, big, not quite fully saturated, but pretty saturated, and I do love the colours this lens makes. They're unlike the colours from any other lens that I've tried, and they really are quite something. They're very big, bright, beautiful, lovely colours, and generally that's the kind of image this lens will give you, a big, bright, beautiful image. It makes some very nice flares. It's very well made, and this really is, gosh, one of the best bargains in vintage 135mm lenses at the moment, the Pentacon 135 f2.8. I'll just show you briefly over here. So there's the lens. I don't know if you can see the aperture blades there, but there are certainly plenty of them. Oh, there they are, look. And there are 15 blades there, so very nice circular bokeh balls from this lens. You can see the coating. The coatings on this lens are pretty effective. It will lose contrast in very strong light, and if you're shooting right into the sun, it will wash out, but it generally has fairly good resistance to flaring, which is fairly unusual for a vintage lens of this type. There's the rear of the lens. It's an M42 mount, so it'll mount to pretty much anything you can imagine. And it's got a sort of a, I don't know, pineapple shape or a grenade shape, it's sometimes referred to as having. So a very nice lens and rather cheaper than the Meyer Optic version, but optically identical, so certainly one to look out for. Well, I can also mention to you this lens. This is the Helios 135mm f2.8, and this is a really small lens. This is the smallest fast 135 that I've ever seen. I'll take the filter off so we can see its true size, and you can see that really is tiny. If we compare it to the Meyer lens or the Pentacon lens, it's, gosh, there's quite a lot of difference there. It's not far off being about 2/3 the height, so that's a really small piece of glass. I'm not quite sure how they've managed to make it so small, but they have. This is a nice sharp lens that gives good colour. It's a little more restrained than the Pentacon. The colour is not quite so excitable, not quite so vibrant. It has a more of a, what can I say, more of a gritty, urban, realistic sort of feel. Aperture blades, let's have a look how many this has. I don't think it's got very many. Yeah, I was right. This doesn't have many blades. It's a 6-bladed aperture, so that means that if you stop down, you're going to see some hexagons in the background from point light sources. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like that, well then this may not be the lens for you. I personally rather like it. I think it's a very interesting effect, and I quite like a bit of shape and a bit of interest in the background. And I'm not sure that, you know, perfectly circular bow cables are necessarily virtuous in themselves, but I guess it's a question of taste. It doesn't bother me, but if it bothers you, there are other lenses. This is a very, very nice little lens. It's very nicely made. The focus ring turns nice and cleanly. And how long is, I think it's about, only about 180 degrees. So that's a very quick action on this lens. I don't think this lens was actually made by Helios. In fact, I know it wasn't, because it says on it made in Japan. So this certainly wasn't made by KMZ. It was probably made by Cosina or Vivitar. I think they made lenses, or one of the other lens manufacturers like Tokina, or who's the other one that everybody likes, Tomioka, the Yashica company. So this is a third-party lens, but it's a very, very nice lens. Let's just have a little look over here. There's our Helios, and you can see its big front element there that does suffer in the sunlight. So it's got a hood, a built-in hood. I like those built-in hoods. I think they work really well. You can see how really small that lens is without it. Very, very small lens indeed. And with it, of course, that adds a bit more length. That helps to protect it from the rays, because that big front element catches the rays very easily. Again, this is an M42 mount, screw mount there at the back. Aperture ring is at the back, running from f2.8 all the way up to f22. So a very nice lens from Helios. I'm not entirely certain who made it, but whoever made it did a very, very nice job. And this lens is very cheap. This can be found for probably from around £20 up to around £40–50. Try not to pay £40 or £50, because they're not really worth that. £20 or £30 is a better value. Let's have a look at another one. This one. Honestly, this was the biggest surprise, I think, of any lens I've ever bought. This is a Hanimex branded lens. It's made in Japan. It says made in Japan on the base there. So it was clearly made by a third-party company, but this is one of the nicest 135s I've shot. It was astonishing. when I shot it, I was absolutely astonished at the quality that this lens gives. It's sharp from wide open. It gives very nice colour. The colour's quite restrained on this lens actually. A little bit like Pentax colours. So I don't know if Pentax undertook any third-party work, but if they did, this could well be made by them. It's certainly made by a company who knows exactly what they're doing, because this is a lovely lens. It's sharp from wide open, it makes beautiful background blur, and the colours are just lovely. They're very delicate and gentle. I'm not sure how many blades this one has. Oh, quite a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is an 8-bladed lens. So again, you're going to see some octagons in the background from point light sources if you stop down, but you know, I actually rather like that. So there's our Hanimex lens, and this is really a lovely lens. It does suffer a little in the sunlight. It doesn't have a cover built in, so it would need to be ideally used with a hood. It's got this big knurled focus ring here to adjust focus with, and it's got an aperture ring at the back. There we are. That runs from f2.8 all the way up to f22. This is an all metal lens, as all these lenses are here today, and the coatings are sort of purpley greeny on this one. I think that's a colour we've seen quite a lot with coatings. Minimum focus distance of this lens is, it's going to be fairly long. They're all fairly long, 6 feet or 1.8 meters. So they do have a fairly long minimum focus distance, but it doesn't really matter because you're fairly close to your subject anyway. The length of the lens takes you pretty close to your subject anyway. So this lens can be found for around about, well, I bought this lens for £20. I had very low expectations. In fact, I didn't have any expectations of it. I thought it would be really not very good, actually. But there you are. It just shows how wrong you can be. This is actually one of the nicest 135s I've shot, and I would recommend anybody who wants a nice fast 135 to grab one of these. They are lovely. Our next fast 135 is not a fast 135 at all. In fact, it's kind of a slow 135. It's this one. It's the Jupiter 11, and it's a 135mm f4 lens. It's a rangefinder lens. This one is in L39 mount. All the rest of them we've looked at today have been SLR lenses, but this one is a rangefinder lens, and this slow, simple little rangefinder lens made in the former Soviet Union in the 1950s and 60s. You wouldn't really expect much, would you? But this is one of the nicest 135s I've shot. Yes, it's a bit slow, okay, but that said, that out of the way, this is gorgeous. This is a lovely little optic. First of all, it looks beautiful. Have you ever seen a lens that looks quite as cool as that? Not sure I have. Very, very nice looker, and it makes fantastic shots as well, and that is, you know, the main point. This is a lens that makes very, very, very nice images. Colours are fairly, what can I say? They're not saturated, they're not pale, they're not pretty and delicate like the Leica 90mm f4 that I tested alongside this one a little while back. They're more earthy and gritty than that. That's the word those are the words I would use to describe this colours from this lens. Earthy, gritty, raw, realistic. It's that sort of lens. It makes beautiful blur. f4 is not fast, and its minimum focus distance is 2.2 meters, so that's not particularly close, but this little thing still makes plenty of blur, and it's really soft. Importantly, it's not overwhelming blur like some of the other lenses here do. They really will overwhelm you with blur if you shoot them wide open and close to the subject. This one This will never overwhelm you with blur, because it just doesn't have too much. In fact, you could argue this has the right amount of blur. It's got some blur, and you don't need any more than some. So let's have a closer look. There is the shiny reflective Jupiter. It's made of aluminium, but it's got this chrome plate on the aluminium. I'm not quite sure how that's been done. I've never really heard of chrome plated aluminium before, and it is suffering in one or two places. Whoops, let's have focus, please. Thank you. And let's have the exposure right. Thank you again. Yeah, so you can see that chrome plate is degrading a little bit in one or two places, but it's still in nice condition. Look at the great big front element there. It does suffer from catching rays from the sun, so it's vulnerable to that, so it needs a hood. And there you can see the purple coatings that on these former Soviet lenses, those are the nicest coatings that they used, in my opinion. They really, really work to give you some fantastic colour and colour performance. And they're really good at being anti-reflective also. Very, very nice coatings. There's our little lens, 135mm f4. And none the worse for that. It's a really nice little optic. I very often take this out for a spin because it's so nice. A lovely little lens. You used to be able to buy these for £20, now nearer £30, possibly £40, but don't pay more than 40 because it's not worth that. That would be an inflated value. Beautiful little 135 with just the right amount of blur. Finally, another 11. This is the Tear 11A, and it really is quite a lens. It's very, very heavy. It's fairly large. It's fairly tall. It has a fairly wide diameter. This is a big lens, make no mistake, and there's no doubt about it. But it's a very, very nice lens. This was sent to me recently, given to me by a viewer, so many, many thanks for that. I will look after this lens and I will use it. I was very surprised by what this lens could do when I first used it. I was amazed at its sharpness from wide open, and I was amazed at the quality of its colour also. It has a sort of a chromy kind of feel. Colours are very, very solid and have a very real strong depth about them. You really couldn't mistake these colours. These colours won't blow away in the breeze. They're very much there. They're very solid, clear and defined, and I do like them very much. Blur is lovely too. It's not particularly well controlled. It's a little bit wild, but my goodness, does it have some character. This lens, well, it's party trick, and it is quite an astonishing party trick, is that it's got the most aperture blades of any lens I've ever shot or even heard of. I've never heard of a lens with more aperture blades than this one. This lens has 20 aperture blades, and that is just astonishing. I do hope I never have to take this lens apart and clean it and reposition those blades on the posts, because there are an awful lot of them. Let me just have a look. They make an almost circular aperture. It's almost perfectly circular, so you're going to get almost perfectly circular bokeh balls from point light sources in the back of your shot. And in the centre, that holds good. They are very, very circular in the centre, but because of the optical qualities of the lens, around the edge they become cat's eyes shapes, and they give a bit of swirl as well. There's a sort of a swirly feel like the Helios lenses have. So here's the lens up close, and my goodness, what a beast it is. It's certainly a very solid thing. It's got this little hood here, and sorry, exposure. Yeah, it's got this little hood here, and it does help. It's got a big front element there that catches the sun, and it does wash out in the sun. There are those aperture blades, look, 20 aperture blades. Isn't that astonishing? Have you ever seen anything like that? Because I haven't. I've never seen a lens with quite so many blades as this one has. So anyway, the hood, as I was saying, it helps, but it's not great. You really do need to put an external hood on this lens because it doesn't sit terribly well, it doesn't position terribly well, it can fall down quite easily at a tap or a nudge, and it's not a great thing. At least it's there, but I would suggest use a separate hood for this lens. There are the preset aperture rings. That's the one with the clicks. That's the one that you actually set. So if you don't want to go any lower than 5.6, that will make sure that you stop at the aperture you've selected and won't go any further. So that's quite nice. I like a preset aperture, and if you set it to 2.8, you can just use it as, I'm sorry, beg your pardon, if you set it to f22, you can just use this second aperture ring as a stepless ring, so it's nice in that regard. It's an M42 lens. There's the mount at the back. Coatings are purpley bluey kind of colour, sort of magenta purpley kind of colour. That's what you want on these Soviet lenses. That's the coating that works best in my experience. So a really, really great little lens, and one that I've really enjoyed using, and is a really, really fantastic piece of kit. It's not cheap. This lens, well, I mean, I say it's not cheap. It goes for between 150, 200 pounds, maybe a bit less than that. But while that's expensive for a vintage lens, it's not actually expensive for the lens that it is. And I think it's probably well worth it. Rather better value, I would suggest, is this Pentacon. This has got 15 aperture blades if you like plenty of blades, and it will give you nice circular bokeh balls. And it's a lot cheaper, around about 40, 50 pounds, possibly less, maybe 20, 30 pounds if you're lucky. So I think that this is the pick of the bunch as far as value goes, but if you want outright performance, well, the aperture blades of this one mean that this one has got to take the crown today. It's not just the blades, it's also the colour, the look of the images. So I think this is the nicest of the lenses here today, but only by a whisker, and only if you like plenty of aperture blades. I think it would be very, very hard to replace my favourite 135s with this lens. This is one that I'll use in addition to other 135s. My favourite of the moment are this Hanimex and this Jupiter, so I won't be getting rid of these anytime soon. But if you want round bokeh balls and very, very nice colour and really characterful background blur, well, the Tear 11 is the one to go for. So I guess that's it from me for today. So many, many thanks for watching. I really appreciate anybody tuning in and watching. Thank you for that. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do chuck us a sub. That would be appreciated. Many, many thanks to subscribers. Thank you for your support. And many, many thanks to patrons also for your support. I do appreciate very much all the support that people give this channel. If you like the work this channel is doing and you want to become a patron yourself, you can do that over at www.patreon.com/Zenography, and you can do that for as little as $1 per month. As for me, that is it for now. So many thanks for watching, and if you're not doing anything too troublesome, irksome or irritating next week at around this time, please do pop in and join me for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.